Hello and welcome to the Reiki Women Podcast. Today we're going to get right into a topic all about discussing the madness around the election. There's a big election happening in the United States, and maybe this is relevant to you if you also live in the United States, or in this episode that is a little bit timely. We're going to also touch into just how we can center ourselves using Reiki when there are big things happening in the world, whether it be a really important election or also in the United States, we're really experiencing some massive storms because of climate change. And so there's just so many reasons why when there's big, overwhelming things happening in the world, the system of Reiki can really help us tap into our own center, even when there's massive storms coming around us. And so we thought we'd discuss a little bit more about how we use Reiki in those moments in our lives. So welcome to the Reiki Women Podcast. I'd love to introduce my beautiful colleagues. I have got Bronwen Logan with Reiki with Bronwen over here, and then the gorgeous Michaela Daystar with Heartscapes Reiki, and I'm Carrie Varela of the Reiki Healing Society. And before we get into this topic, we just invite you to subscribe, share this episode with a friend who you think might benefit from it, and yeah, we just love to have you part of our community so that you know when our amazing episodes are coming out next. Michaela, will you tell us a little bit more about what you do in those moments where there's big things happening in the world or in your life, and how Reiki supports you in those moments?
Yeah, it's such an important topic because obviously here in the US, as you mentioned, there's a lot of social pressure and kind of buzz and conversation and energy, and therefore big emotions around our upcoming presidential election. And at any point, anywhere in the world, there's something equivalent to that, something on the national stage or even on the global stage that's causing a sense of pressure, perhaps a sense of anxiety or fear or excitement that might be a distraction, that might impact our nervous system, impact our lives. So it's when we zoom out from our life, from our day to day, we can see how much we're impacted in that day to day by the world around us. And there's so much, I'm really looking forward to hearing what came up for the two of you as well, because there's just so much that's present in this time and place in the United States. If you're paying any attention at all to this year's election cycle, you can probably tell that there's a fair amount of charge. There's a lot of tension in the US in particular around this election. It's a particularly divisive one. It's one that for many people feels very high stakes. On whatever side a person is on, there is this sense that this is a very high stakes election. And anytime that's the case, of course, the potential for fear, for anxiety, for anger, and all of the things that can get really pressurized inside of our system are present. Of course, these are all things that the system of Reiki helps support us in navigating, making more space inside of ourselves for all of those things to be present. But I think when I reflected on this moment in politics in the US around this election, the thing that really rose to the surface for me as where my Reiki practice is being the most supportive is around the intense sense of disconnection that these circumstances are causing for people inside of families, communities, and nationally. This intense sense that there is a right side and a wrong side, this division between factions is very intense in this election cycle. And it's a division that's been building for many cycles, but seems particularly intense this round. And whatever candidate one supports, it's easy to see, I would hope, for most people, that this stark sense of division as a nation is not good, is just not good for us. And it's not always the way that it has been, right? It's not always been the case that being in favor of opposing candidates in an election causes this sense of us and them, and we are not like them, and we do not like them, and we are against them. And I just see that happening all over in the conversations around the election, and not just like state to state, but again, in communities, even in families, even. And so there's an incredible amount of pain that comes with that, this sense of being divided as a nation around something, in a sense, mundane as an election, right? Part of being in a democratic society is supposed to be that elections are routine. They're expected. They happen at the same schedule. They're supposed to be normal part of life. And I would argue they're not supposed to cause this sense of intense disconnection among the people of the nation that are supposed to come together to elect our leaders from every level of government. And so when I sit with that, like that's the thing that's causing me the most stress and pain right now. This sense of division and in many cases even hatred, country person to country person around this issue when it just is not supposed to be that way. And so settling into my Reiki practice, I again just once again feel so grateful to be practicing Reiki from the perspective of its origins, because in the Japanese origins of Reiki, of course, we get this foundation of the philosophical concept and then the experience of interconnection, this fundamental principle that forms the basis of the philosophical and spiritual principles that the system of Reiki comes from. This perspective, belief that all life is interconnected across the whole universe. And that plays out in our interpersonal lives, right? That we can leverage that belief in interconnection and then the experience of interconnection that we have the potential to experience when we're practicing the system of Reiki. I've had really intense moments of feeling that sense of interconnection. I've had other times of practicing where I couldn't quite get there, right? But there's always the potential of our Reiki practice opening us up to this sense of being woven together in this web of life and in this web of community when we're looking at our day-to-day life. And that for me has been really fundamental in helping me stay grounded in this particularly precarious election cycle, where it does feel to me that this is a very high stakes election, and I'm seeing the way in which the rhetoric of disconnection and otherism is being weaponized in the way in which candidates all over, all sides of the aisle are talking about it. And so I really encourage people to work with that element of Reiki and to work with it in community with each other. One of my colleagues and I have been holding a monthly circle specifically around kind of processing emotions around the election using the system of Reiki. And we've worked with this very aspect quite a bit and using practices that allow us at our own pace, whatever pace feels right for each person, to open our hearts more and more to the possibility of connection with people that we are strongly in disagreement over. And there's been moments for me, I'll speak for myself now, not necessarily for participants, but in my own practice and in that space of really feeling that sense of connection and compassion with the people on the other side from where I stand politically, who I am politically incredibly opposed to and very much do not want to win this election. But being able to set that aside and say, in this space of Reiki, in this space of the truth of who and what we are, me and these people are the same, right? We are connected intrinsically. And we're connected hara to hara. We're connected true self to true self, spark of life to spark of life. All of these political differences are the result of each of us walking our own path in our life, in our body, but that's not who we truly are. And so dropping into that sense of connection has been incredibly impactful for me in the sense of being able to extend compassion to people that I strongly disagree with. And this is the way, in my mind, politics is supposed to be. We can disagree on things that how to make policy decisions, to make how societies should be structured, what laws should be made, which ones should go away. There's always going to be disagreement there. But we don't have to approach that disagreement from a place of hatred, from a place of a lack of compassion, from a place of you are nothing like me. You don't have anything to do with me. You're just wrong. As opposed to we're the same because we're alive and we're people. And we have a heart and we have an energy system and we have a hara, and we have a spark of life, and we're connected, we're woven together. And so therefore, I have compassion for you. I love you in a certain sense, and I disagree. And I have different ideas about the way the world should be, right? And then we work that out through the mechanisms that we've developed. But can we hold that center of compassion for people that we vehemently disagree with, even if they can't hold it for us? That's like next level practice, right? That's what I aspire to be like all the time. I'm not like that all the time. Let me be clear. I'm not walking around like some sage, just like I have all the compassion for all of the people that are freaking me right out right now. I definitely have many moments where I'm in the us versus them dynamic for sure. But I'm aware of it. I have a sense of like, oh, yeah, I'm in that space. I'm really resisting having compassion for this person right now. And that awareness becomes a place to come back to practice and to settle back in and say, okay, what really matters is this connection that we all have. But yeah, that's where I wanted to start, particularly around the election and even around national disasters. Unfortunately, that is very politicized as well, right? So in how we respond to natural disasters, there's a little bit of that us versus them as well. But yeah, in these places that are overtly about choosing a side and advocating for that side, I think our Reiki practice, settling into the aspect of Reiki that brings us to a point of interconnection, is essential for, I'm going to go ahead and say it's essential for democracy to continue to be healthy and to survive in the long term. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Our democracy in the United States, but probably in other places in the world as well, desperately needs our nation to have access to a sense of compassion and connection for each other. I'll just leave it right there. What do you think, Bronwen? As an Australian observer who gets to watch our election like it's a reality TV show.
It is. It's the best thing on TV at the moment. Yeah. I do have compassion for you all, that you have to live in this extreme sort of boiling pot of an existence at the moment where everything's like this and everyone's nervous and all these emotions are flying around the place. There's a lot of anger and yeah. I was thinking as you were talking about very much about duality, obviously, right? Because it's like the perfect example of duality. Duality exists in everything in our lives. And so it's no wonder that it also comes up with this sort of thing. In fact, we set it up because basically in Australia, and it seems like in the US, we basically have a two-party system where politically you just have these dual elements and people, they adhere to one or the other. When we work with dual elements, we work with the earth and the heavens. So we have these dual elements because they're at opposite ends. Neither one is good or bad, right? There's no actual good or bad. Now, I'm not being political here at all, right? Just talking about the idea of duality. They have certain characteristics. It's the coming together of these elements that actually creates harmony. And you use the word compassion, Michaela. So when these things come together, that's the beauty this is not the beauty. This is the beauty, if you like, where they come together and they create something amazing and wonderful. If we're looking at things like elections, what we really want to see is we want to see people communicating. We want to see people putting forth their ideas, talking to each other. And I think that's incredibly difficult when we become so attached to one of these dual elements that we actually can't be loose enough to allow this blending, this eventual blending and coming together and creation. We become really attached to our ideas, really fixated on our ideas because it makes us feel comfortable. It's this thing of no change, isn't it? That we love that when there's no change, nothing's happening. And that's what we think, right? We think that nothing's happening, and we think that we can just stay in this little space and we'll be safe. But it doesn't work like that. Life is always changing, shifting, and we have these things that can blend together, and we need to allow those things to come together to actually create a harmonious society, and a society that represents us all. So sitting in our little spaces like this and locking ourselves off from everyone isn't actually going to be helpful. Yeah. If I'm looking at from a Reiki perspective, I see that we often talk about this idea of the two truths, the Buddhist idea of two truths. And the ultimate truth, it's more than a non-dual experience. The ultimate truth is simply where we all exist together. And it's like this thing that you were talking about, interconnection. It is this deep level of us all being humans on this planet together. And we need to accept that we are all of that. We all have this similarity. We all breathe in and out the same air. We all have the same needs for food, shelter, companionship. And that is really an ultimate truth. And then we have above that, we have these relative truths, and that's the dual experience that we've just been talking about. So we have these dual things and they're going like this, but when they come together, then they create this non-dual experience, which is still mundane, as you said. It's still about the everyday life, but we can bring these things together. And it's really that we need to be open enough to each other to have this discourse and be able to have passion for sure, but to have respect and care for other beings in that. So that's that coming together is really a compassionate thing. It's something that we do through compassion because we want to be able to share our loves and our passions with others. There is a lovely little quote that I had put up yesterday in my Facebook group. So come join me, Friends of Reiki with Bronwen. And the quote, I'll just read it for you. It says, "The way to change others' minds is with affection and not anger." And I think that's really a great representation of what we're talking about here. We can all have our own feelings and ideas, but really what we want to do is we want to share them compassionately. If we share them angrily, what happens? Yeah, anger just creates anger, which creates anger. And it's like, you started it. No, you started it. No, you started it. It doesn't get us anywhere. And as adults, we need to be able to communicate in a way that is effective and actually work towards what is good for all of us, because we all live in that ultimate truth. We all live at that existence of us all being there together, breathing, living together, and needing each other to exist. We cannot exist on our own. So I think those are really important things to remember. And I'd love to, if it's okay, at the end of this, just do a little practice with that quote, just to bring people into that mindset.
Oh goodness. Well, how do you have this kind of conversation without getting political? It's really hard. But I like that we tried and done our best. And I think elections actually this like perfect example of duality and why it doesn't work. Why it doesn't work. Because if it's always about somebody winning over somebody else losing, that always is going to create pain, disenfranchisement, a sense of being punished or put down or losing, when really there's so much to be gained by having an intelligent and respectful and responsible dialogue between somebody who has a different point of view. You probably, if you could sit down and have a conversation with somebody who has a really different point of view from you and be able to hold this space in a way that's non-judgmental, that's not throwing a bunch of daggers and not projecting a bunch of judgments on somebody, you're bound to learn something about somebody, and you're bound to learn something about yourself as well. And I think the thing about oneness that is so profound and yet so baffling is that we are all part of the same co-arising, and yet we have very different minds and very, very different viewpoints and very different ways in which life has imprinted a certain point of view and a certain perspective on us. And of course, that can be reflected in our so many different ways, but also in our political choices. I think, I guess the other thing that's really coming up for me is our relationship with power and who is worthy of power and who is not. And let's just face it, in the U.S. election, it's a woman from an immigrant family and a man from a very wealthy and established political, not political, political family. So I'm not saying that very well. Like this whole dynamic of a woman being president. And that is that is breaking a ceiling of power dynamic. And I think what we've found with prior election, Hillary Clinton was running against a certain person, there was an incredible amount of energy around this whole notion of whether a woman can be president. And so on the Reiki Women Podcast, let's not deny the fact that some people have really divisive views over whether or not even a woman is capable of sitting in a place of power. And so in those senses too, we can use a practice like Reiki to help us work with our own relationship to power. And particularly maybe on the feminine side of it is our relationship with disempowerment and these assumptions that we live in a society that is patriarchal, that women are inferior or women aren't capable, or and how that gets ingrained really in our psyche. And I think there's plenty of women out there who don't feel that way and have had to really, like, it's this kind of one-upsmanship. So it's, if I feel disempowered, then I need to put somebody else down in order to feel more powerful. And that's when we get into some really ugly, painful dynamics. And it can happen in politics, it can happen in relationships too. And what that always leaves us left with is a sense of being disconnected from somebody and really not honoring other people's point of views and other people's feelings too. So I think the practice of Reiki can be an incredible practice to help us take our power back in a way that is kind and is compassionate and isn't about power over anyone, but really actually stepping into your own light and to your own power. And so I'm inspired to be stepping into my own light and power. Is that when I moved to where I live in California, I live in like one of the smallest towns in California. And as such, they're like always looking for people to be volunteer for civic events, local events, politics. And there was some openings on city council, and I'm running unopposed to be a part of city council. So I'm really excited to step into it. And it's just so bizarre. I'm just like, and I guess for me lately is I've just been really working on this general sense of apathy where I'm just so overwhelmed and disgusted by the political scene. And every 4 years an election cycle, it just gets nasty this time of year. It really does. People are just throwing out the ugliest, awfulest parts of themselves, and it's just not fun. And so this is my time of year where I'm just like tuned out. I'm like, you got my vote, who I've got my vote for, and it's never going to change. There's no way I would ever vote for this other party. And I used to be very politically active on social media and very clear about who I was voting for. And I got to a point where I just felt like, I don't really think I'm swaying anybody's point of view. I don't think I'm really adding anything to this dialogue. I think that actually tuning it out sometimes is more powerful because it's just hard to listen to it all the time and just to feel like emotionally hooked in to the highs and lows of whose party is polling better and whose party's not. And there is this importance too of who we place into power and why we give certain people power and what are they going to do with that power. And as I shared around social media about how I'm going to be stepping into this role as a town council member, I mentioned it in a local group, and I have one part of my intention for joining town councils to really try to represent and create more partnership and collaboration with the Indigenous community where I live, because there's a incredibly active political community, and where I am is actually one of the last places where people were displaced because of colonization. They were literally removed from the town of Trinidad where I live in like the 1950s or something like that. And that was like one of the last places that happened, where like Native American people were forcefully removed from their land. And the Indigenous community have maybe a little bit more political activism because of that, and because they were stakeholders in the land for so long, and it's been now about 70 years since they were displaced. I guess it's just an interesting dynamic. But what's unfair about it all is in that process of displacing Native American people, which in and of itself is just an incredible travesty, how our government handled it was to give power to some random people and really excluded the traditional stakeholders of this area. And what it leaves is just a whole lot of disconnection inside of the Indigenous community here. And it's just perfectly understandable, but it's a really precarious political landscape. So even saying, oh, I want to support Indigenous rights, it's not an easy thing to say, which and that can come with a lot of baggage there. And so it is important too to remember the people that we elect, they have a lot of different people coming at them with different points of view and different perspectives, and it's a challenging role to try to bring people together and to try to see what the best solution is. And so I think we need to be kind and compassionate and supportive to the people that we place in power, or whoever is in power. And in my spiritual practice and my own experiences of Reiki, I feel like Reiki empowers the person who gets the job. And it's not about who it is and who's better. It's not like there's God is on one side or the other, or the universe is on one side or the other. It's who sits in that seat, and giving that person, no matter what they believe, that opportunity to hold so many different points of view and perspectives, and give them the opportunity to lead. And I think we all deserve a chance. And I think people on the other side of the political debate, they have some good points of view, and they have solid reasoning behind their perspectives and points of view. And even if mine is different than somebody else, we need to learn to respect each other's differences, and yet still not create this really painful dynamic of division and one-upsmanship that really it's ugly. So those are my thoughts.
Oh, Carrie, you brought some spicy, amazing perspectives here that I've got some responses for. But before I share that, I want to just pause and give us an opportunity to thank our sponsors for this episode of Reiki Women Podcast. And as it turns out, this episode is sponsored by the same sponsors that every episode of Reiki Women Podcast is supported by, which is us. The three of us each own Reiki businesses, are doing amazing things in the world, and it is on the platform of those businesses that we get to come here and have these conversations week after week to share with all of you. And so as we come to the completion almost of our second year of offering this space, we wanted to start having an opportunity to naming some of the amazing things that we are up to in the world and that help to make this podcast possible. And so I'd love to give Bronwen and Carrie an opportunity in this moment to share what is coming up on the horizon in both of your worlds. Bronwen, I'm going to pitch it to you first.
All right, let's see what I can do. I'm going to make this a proper ad, right? Mm-hmm. So, have you ever wondered about your lineage, or have you ever wondered about the lineage of your Reiki friends, or what practices you do, where they come from, who started them, and what actually might be the reasonings behind some of the practices that you do? Anything that you want to know about the history of the system of Reiki and where it's at the moment is in a book called the Reiki Sourcebook. Now, the Reiki Sourcebook came out 20 years ago. Can't believe it's that long. But when it did come out, actually, I've got a copy of it here. Oh. So that's the original version. You should see the new cover. It's really beautiful. I love it. But this one's very different. And that's the original one. And as you can see, it's a lovely thick book. Yes. With lots and lots and lots of information that I find impossible to hold in my head. It's got all this research in it, and that's all gone into that book. At the time, it was really groundbreaking because everyone was just writing Reiki manuals, but this is different, and it wasn't from a specific viewpoint. So it was trying not to be political, and it was actually written for anyone and everyone who's interested in the system of Reiki, to give them the opportunity to look at their practice, find out where it actually came from, what the bits and pieces were. And it also talks about the future of the system of Reiki. So it talks about climate change, how we can help as Reiki practitioners, looking at where we want the system of Reiki to go. So keep your eyes open. It's ready for pre-order at the moment. I'll put some links below, and it'll be out next month. So that's pretty soon. And I'm really excited about that. And I hope that you all go and get yourselves a copy, because it's a really helpful thing to have in your library. That's my ad.
I cannot wait to update that book in my library that is very active with my students. So I am very much looking forward to it. And Carrie, what do you have coming up on the horizon?
Yeah. If you're listening to this in a timely way, I have a Reiki Level 1 course coming up, and that's just a great way to get your hands on some of this knowledge of Reiki prior to Western influence, and that really comes from these Japanese perspectives and points of view on the system of Reiki. But I guess the big thing that I'm really excited about, and I've been really, this has been inside me for over 4 years now, but I'm about to announce my GoPro with Reiki mentorship program, which is going to be a full year of support for all the lucky souls who come into the mentorship program. And in this supportive container, we'll be connecting deeply with Reiki to help you spark and empower you on to create the vision of the Reiki business that you want to create. And it includes so much amazing things, like Michaela's trauma-informed Reiki course. It also includes this whole framework on how you can organize your business elegantly with the ebb and flow of nature, align your business with nature's law and nature's principles, and then also get more clarity around what's really moving the dial in your Reiki business. So even if you don't have a Reiki business yet, we'll talk about how you're going to start to build these income streams inside of your Reiki business that build upon each other and ultimately help you create a holistic offering that you can weave together multiple different modalities, healing modalities, if you use something beyond Reiki, to bring these different threads together in order to create something that really supports your clients on a lot of different levels. And so I'm just really excited about launching this program. It's going to start in January, and it's going to be a whole year together for us to just really nurture and grow and be in community as we build our Reiki businesses, and just or do the work that the Reiki business asks of us. And there's so many highs and lows running your own business, so it's just really, I think, a game changer is to really open up and accept the support that really it does need. You can't do this in isolation. Doing it in community is such a more easeful and balanced way of being a solo practitioner business. So join me for GoPro with Reiki. I'll be having more posts about it, I'm sure, in the group, and more opportunities for you to learn more for the beginning of the year.
That is so exciting, Carrie. Congratulations on that major launch. I didn't think I had anything for today, but I'm going to real quick plug the Reiki Healing Summit that is coming up. Last year, the three of us got to have a conversation that was part of the summit, and this year I'll be presenting a conversation. The theme of the summit is embracing change and renewal through Reiki, and I, of course, couldn't resist talking about the fact that change generally causes discomfort, and that the system of Reiki gives us strategies for navigating discomfort, making more space for it. So that's the topic of that conversation. So the Reiki Raise Summit is happening in November. We'll put a link to it down below. There'll be tons and tons of great conversations with Reiki people from all over the world. And with that, let's jump back into this juicy conversation about navigating the election and other national pressures on our psyche. And Carrie, you were sharing some really powerful examples of, I would say, navigating engagement around these things. And I really resonated with a lot of what you were sharing, and feeling it really connected to that quote that you shared with us, Bronwen, in the beginning, around approaching people with love instead of anger. I'm paraphrasing, but I think, Carrie, you and I share a little bit of a history around being very politically active for a very long time, and being very, for me, my experience of that early in my life was being very dogmatically, vitriolically on one side of the debate, and really not making much space at all for having the kinds of conversations that you just talked about, conversations across difference that are had with respect and with compassion for each other. I grew up in a very politically homogeneous community, so we had a lot of diversity in almost every category of person except political viewpoint. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s maybe that I started really encountering people who just thought very differently from me politically. And I was not prepared to have those conversations in a way that was productive, compassionate. I literally did not have the skill to listen to somebody's perspective on an issue that I cared deeply about from the opposite perspective, and to hear any legitimacy in their perspective, right? I was so conditioned to be opposed to that different viewpoint that I couldn't connect with somebody who was espousing it. I was just thinking about, how am I going to take this person down because they're wrong? And it was a really painful process that happened over about a year, in all places in a gardening forum. Because when I became a gardener, I wanted to network with other gardeners, and found myself in forums with gardeners from all over the country, and having these conversations for the first time in my life. And it was very painful realizing how ill-equipped I was to enter into them in a way that was respectful and compassionate. And I would have the experience of disconnecting from somebody who I'd had very good relationships with around gardening, and all of a sudden we're talking about whatever political subject, and all of a sudden we're yelling at each other. And that was so disorienting. It was so like, whoa, what's even happening here? And am I the problem? are they the problem? What's the problem here? Because all of a sudden we're not able to even have a simple conversation. And it was very painful when I had to recognize that in many of those conversations, I was in fact the problem. I was the one who was like, I don't want to be connected to you. And so being able to hold integrity with our viewpoint, to believe what we believe, to have a firm foundation, while at the same time listening carefully to another person's perspective and feeling through that connection that we have that they came to their perspective because of legitimate experiences in their life. And they have reasons to believe what they believe. And those reasons on the core level are the same reasons as I have. Having a need for feeling safe, a need for belonging, a need for connection, a need for love, a need for basic security, and having my foundational needs met. And there's just these different points of view of how we get to those outcomes. And it was a long time before I felt on solid ground in those kinds of conversations. And I had to get there before I had Reiki in my life. And yeah, and once I had that framework of interconnection that I spoke to earlier, it became much easier to hold space for and with people who believe things that are very different than me. And it was a very painful process. So again, just speaking to that, the power of having a practice that brings our attention to interconnection. The other thing, Carrie, you're talking about power. Such an incredibly important conversation. And we've had conversations about power here in this space, particularly around power dynamics when it comes to gender. And I think the thing that I want to add to that piece is that political systems inherently disempower people in terms of the way that they're able to move through the world, resources they're able to access, is their voice heard, is their experience taken into account when laws are made, and so on. And generally speaking, there are certain types of people who tend to hold power and those who tend to be more disenfranchised. And for those of us, and we can experience that sense of disenfranchisement across any of our identities. And often, for most people, we might have parts of our identity where we're afforded more power. For example, as a white American, I'm afforded more power because of my racial identity, whereas my gender tends to afford me less power. So for those of us who've had experiences of feeling that our power has been taken from us by the system, by the structures, you mentioned patriarchy, Carrie, that's certainly a big one. Colonization, you also spoke to. Racism, all of these structures that are embedded into society. The system of Reiki is also an incredibly valuable tool for bringing us back to the truth that our power is actually inherent and cannot be taken away from us. Our freedom of movement can be taken away, our access to resources can be taken away, but our fundamental power as a living being, as a being that can access energy in the world, that can access resources in the world, cannot be taken away from us. And I have found that to be an incredibly important aspect of my Reiki practice as well, that holding the contradiction of experiencing rights or access to resources taken away because of structures, but still feeling myself to be powerful and to be grounded and to be capable. And from that place, I'm in a much better position to then work around reaccessing those resources, reaccessing political power, and so on. Many amazing leaders in social justice movements have spoken about the experience of using things like meditation to regain a sense of their own power and their own strength internally, when in many cases all of their external power has been removed. You know, they've been imprisoned, they've had property seized, they've had their ability to communicate with the outside world removed from them. But finding that sense of empowerment inside of themselves and letting that steady them through that process and then come back stronger as a result. So I just wanted to speak to that because many of us have had that experience of feeling disempowered by political systems, by social structures. of having resources and access and rights taken away, and being able to have a practice that enables us to feel inside of ourselves that we're still resourced, we're still centered, we're still grounded, we're still powerful, is an incredible asset in writing those systems of oppression, and has in the past historically been an incredible asset for people who have made incredible change in this world across many different nations. So I really appreciated, Carrie, you bringing up the topic of power in the context of this conversation. It's very essential.
Well, that's a great reminder, isn't it? To look inside ourselves and really feel that sense of who we are, and not to allow ourselves to be pushed down, and to remember who we actually are inside and that strength that we have inside. Thank you so much for that. It's really beautiful. I know you feel like that in the US there is this polarity, but it does cross into many other countries, and probably all countries to some degree. And I know recently there was here a case where a woman who was in one of the political parties, and she was a minister, and she was told that she actually left the party, but she was told that she should not think that she was actually going to get any important work coming her way, or that she had any future career further than where she was already, because it was considered that the person who was in charge of the party did not believe that women actually were capable of any true positions of power. Now, this is today, this isn't 50 years ago. And this was said privately to this person, who then left and has told everybody. But it doesn't seem to shock us. It seems to feel like we let it go, and we just go, oh, there they go again. And it's really difficult to find our power out there in the world. And as you were saying, Michaela, we need to start here and remember that strength inside of ourselves. Let's just see how we feel inside ourselves about our thoughts towards others. So just relaxing for the moment. I'd like you to take 3 lovely deep breaths in. And as you breathe in, just imagine that you've got these roots growing from your body down into the ground, and release them even further as you breathe out. Connecting you down into the earth. Feel that strength and that steadiness of the earth. Know what it feels like to be totally interconnected with the earth, your roots moving down further, deeper and around, flexible but strong. Breathing into that. Now, the quote that we're going to look at is, "The way to change others' minds is with affection and not anger." To begin with, I'd like you to bring your hands to your heart center of your chest. And I want you to feel that sense of affection that we feel when we're with someone we love, we care for. It could be an animal, a person, a situation, and really feeling that sense of love and care, and really deep connection that we have with others, or whatever it is that we feel this affection for, and allow it to really escape from you. Allow it out into your world. Feel it just releasing out. And you're just breathing in and out affection, love, care, compassion, kindness. Let every cell of your body wallow in this delightful feeling of love and care. And now for a moment, think of the precept for today only: do not anger. And think of a situation where you have been discussing something with someone and it's turned into an angry situation. And just see what happens. And when you're angry, how does that person respond? How do they respond to you? What happens to this engagement between the two of you? We can see it. We can see where that anger takes us. So now I'd like you to start to come back to that sense of affection and care and really let it dissolve that anger that you've been experiencing and that situation, and sit back into that lovely feeling of deep affection, deep love, deep care. And let every part of your body, from your feet all the way up through your body to your head, out to your hands, every part, the front, back, insides, just be deep love and affection. And now take that same situation and just engage with that person using that love and affection and care. Are your words different? Are your movements different? Are your thoughts different? Are your feelings different? And how does this change the exchange between you? How does someone respond to that? And just coming back to this moment here with each other and staying in that sense of radiating that love and care with everyone and everything, and knowing the difference that sort of engagement with others can make for you and for them. So coming from that space of true affection and love.
Thank you so much, Bronwen. That was so lovely to just drop into that and remind ourselves of how different we can show up inside of divisive and contentious and angry situations. All right, friends, for those of you listening, we got to go to the punchline. Get out and vote. Okay, get out and vote. Take your ass to the election and pencil in, or don't use a pencil because that probably won't be valid, but make sure your vote matters and make sure that you put yourself out there. Don't be so apathetic to think it doesn't matter. It absolutely does. And take your power back from this election and from other toxic people in your life. And remember your power to choose, right? We have a power to choose. We can choose the path that we really believe in. And don't let political narcissism and all of this other stuff disconnect you from your core truth, right? Get out there and vote. And if you live in a country other than the United States, I just want you to know that I see you and your political seed matters too. And your relationship with matter, power, and all of that matters no matter who you are. And I think the way that spirit sees us is as equal. Everybody's equal. It's our ego. It's all of these imprints that we get in our society and life that tell us we're any less or better or worse than anybody else. So show up, make your voice count, and we love you so much from the Reiki Women Podcast. So do all the things, please. Comment, most importantly, subscribe so you can be in touch with all of our amazing episodes that are coming. We'll see you next time. Big love. Mwah.
Bye.